everybody, to an exciting new week of Let's Do Lunch. Today is Monday, which is our Business of Streaming Day, and we have a fantastic show for you. We also have shows tomorrow. We'll be revisiting the rise of the NFT segments. And our Rights Tech Roundtable is on Thursday and Business of Music on Friday. First, let me remind everybody that we love to know who's here. So please, just like Laura did for Digital Media Wire, post a little bit about yourself in the chat. When you do that, make sure to change your drop down from all panelists to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your posts. If you do have questions for the panel today, please put them in the Q&A area so that they go directly to Mr. Dixon, our moderator today. As I mentioned, we have a great show today. Today's show is hosted by our friends at StackPath. Thank you to them for supporting the show today. And on the show today, we have Arash Marzban, SVP of Product at StackPath. Welcome, Arash.
Matt, thank you for having me. Excited to be on with you guys.
Great to have you here. And our moderator with the most, Colin Dixon from nScreenMedia. Come on down. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Nick. Good to see you. And Arash, welcome. Welcome to the show. We do have a great discussion today. As Ned said, please remember to put your questions in the Q&A. And please do put questions in the Q&A. Thank you. That's my dog just making a comment there. I'll try and work those into the conversation if appropriate, and we will definitely have a Q&A session at the end. So, Arash, you know, I've got a feeling that our audience is not familiar with StackPath. So why don't you introduce StackPath and yourself a little bit?
You bet, Colin. Thank you. So my name is Arash Marzban. I'm the SVP of Product at StackPath. So that means I do product and product-related things here at the company with me and my team, which is a fun, exciting job. My quick background for everyone on the call is I have come from kind of the content space in general. One of my first companies or startups was actually a media delivery company trying to do much of what we saw with Boxy and Roku and everyone else through the evolution. So building set-top boxes that can be the hub of content inside the home. And so StackPath, let's take that fast forward to where I am now. And StackPath, we focus on something that is near and dear to my heart, which is or I should really say, we're answering the question of how do companies build technology in a world where the demand for content and services and data is just accelerating more and more? So StackPath is an edge computing company, and our foundational service is around building a platform, infrastructure services, and low latency delivery that enables a company to go from any application, accelerate that, cache it, deliver it, and secure it. And so we cover the whole gamut of everything that's possible at the edge. And ultimately, we support a lot of companies and innovators in the industry who are figuring out new ways of delivering content and awesome experiences to end users globally.
Very good. All right. So we are going to talk about some of those challenges right now. And it's very good that you reminded everybody that you're the head of product, because there is always a danger that we could get too technical. We'll keep each other honest. We'll keep each other honest here.
That's right.
Not delve into the Rococo intricacies of networking and distribution of video. We'll keep it light. So why don't we start off with some of the challenges that we have in video delivery today? Particularly, I mean, we are CDN focused. There's no question about that. So how is that holding us back? What sort of problems is it throwing up? And,
Sure.
And then we'll get onto the solution space.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's simply the view that I think a lot of us have on the call, and that is that we know for a fact that online video has exploded. Not just that it's grown massively year over year for the past 5 to 10 years, but more so that consumption grew dramatically during the pandemic, and it's sustained. And there's some really interesting statistics out there. One of my favorites actually doesn't have to do with like the type of video and movies that necessarily we always love to consume, but it has to do with things like Zoom, for example, or video chat services, which again are a means of delivering live video transmission over a network or an over a platform. And we have seen anywhere from 50% to 100% growth, meaning massive exponential growth in how much video content is traversing just our network alone. I think Zoom went from something like, 10,000 concurrent users to 300, or just, it's incredible numbers globally when you look at it. And so taking that into account, the challenges for delivering video are really reliant on a couple of key things. And we think the first layer of that is the network has to be there. You have to have the availability of platform and services to be able to deliver that. And then you go to the second layer, which is what is my customer experience like? So whether I'm doing SVOD or I'm doing AVOD or whatever it might be, I've got to have the ability to run my service and application layer someplace where it's got the lowest latency, high availability, and I can take the whole stack and deliver it reliably over a network to my end users. So just the demand mixed in with what the platform and services require really set the foundation for that standpoint from our view. And it doesn't even take into account some of the cool stuff that we saw happen. So, this year was a record year for people watching live video. The Super Bowl is an excellent example of that, where you had a massive audience tune in. And as cord cutting has become more and more popular and has become more of a trend, obviously, more of a standard even, if you will, we saw a big shift for that. And that starts to bring up questions around, what are the challenges again, right? So how do I ensure a great customer experience? And I won't name any names, but I actually watched the Super Bowl on 2 or 3 different applications or services during the course of the show itself. And so I got to experience everything from the latency differences to audio and video quality and artifacts that might be present in it, as well as just what the overall experience of jumping into the stream and enjoying it was. And it's a really interesting kind of time frame, because as new technology, like things that we're doing at StackPath, come into play, and as all of these service providers and content creators and platforms start to look at what does the future of video delivery look like, it sets the stage for starting to address some of those challenges. But first, we have to acknowledge what those key issues are and which ones of them are driving, let's call it behavior that we don't want from audiences, people, tuning out quickly, or people being unhappy with the experience, or not finding the content that they want. And it's just a fascinating kind of mix of all of those scenarios and moments brought together, if you will, as the technology is evolving as well. So those are just some of mine, some that are top of mind for me.
Yeah. One of the things that you brought up the Super Bowl, and by my calculations, about 10% of the audience watched this year. Maybe just a little bit over 10% of the audience this year watched digitally, because when they report the numbers, they never include virtual MVPDs. Those are always rolled into the numbers for traditional media. So yeah, I reckon we got to about 10 million, something 9 to 10 million, something like that, and that brings up a couple of interesting questions, that particularly in live sports, you got this issue with flash mobs, and this can cause some really big problems, right? Where suddenly a game gets hot.
That is a great item as well. So how do you manage the demand for live viewing? And there's some really interesting statistics around that as well. And I'll talk about kind of what goes on through our mind for it, which is, I saw one recently through reading that sort of said, if anyone thinks live viewership is dead, the reality is that live content on the internet actually, holds the attention span of the user 10 to 20 times longer than pre-recorded or on-demand content. And it's a fascinating concept, and of course it's true. So things get exciting in live streaming. You need scalability, and where you can perhaps predict somewhat content demand depending on when it comes out and what the content looks like, call it the impulse of excitement followed by the trickle of continued viewership. Live streaming is a very different animal, and people may tune in at different times. People will watch their Twitter feeds and understand what's going on. So there's a component of that comes into looking at, okay, first I need a platform that's highly scalable, so that when I do have those spikes, when I have that irregular viewership and activity, because I get into the fourth quarter of a game and man, friends are calling each other and tweeting and slacking or doing whatever and trying to get each other's attention, it becomes a draw-in. So I need to have the reserve capacity and platform available to do that. The second part of live viewing that's really interesting too is, how do I handle and manage the fact that I'm trying to take an event, let's say, Premier League is an excellent one, and who doesn't love soccer? But you're watching a game like that, and again, you get into the last few minutes of the game, it can be absolutely exciting. If it's a close one, it's a burner, maybe the goalie got pulled, it's going to be super fun. So how do I make sure that at the same time, as a platform or service company that is delivering something like EPL, how do I make sure that I'm not breaking my feed up? And so, my users on the West Coast of the US versus the East Coast, or, in the UK or in Europe or Asia or anywhere else, doesn't get this staggered, non-live, non-linear view of the content. So if I'm watching, let's say, the Super Bowl, another example, and my buddy in California gets to see the touchdown 10 seconds before I do, or even 30 seconds, that is a massive problem. So when you're looking at live streaming, both the peakiness, the potential for increased excitement and demand at various times during the event, mixed in with how do I sustainably deliver that in a uniform fashion globally without time delay, both are fascinating problems. And it all comes down to, do I have the network, and do I have the compute platform, and do I have my caching and services set up to be able to do that? And how do I then also manage the user experience of quality of video delivery, audio quality, error handling and breakup during the video stream as well?
Yeah.
But it's a great one, great question.
Yeah, latency is a particularly interesting one. So during the Super Bowl, I measured my TV streaming latency at about 20 seconds. And that's too much. I mean, I was seeing stuff on Twitter, and people were texting me about stuff, and I hadn't seen it yet. So really low latency that's a problem. But there are also other problems with latency, right? That's synced streams, so I can't do cool features like multi-camera angles and stuff like that. That's a problem as well, right?
Absolutely, and to really be able to do those types of things, again, the basics are always true, and it's fascinating that no matter how creative we as humans, as product people, as engineers are, the basics still apply to being able to effectively solution for problems that we see, globally. And looking at exactly that kind of scenario of how do I manage multiple streams and enable a seamless switch between them mid-feed, because that's one of the things that internet-based video, over-the-top video allows, is that you have this amazing interactive capability where you can define what stream that you want, so long as it's available and provided. I'll give you an example. I'm a big Formula One fan, so I love watching the F1 races, and being able to have a tool or platform under my fingertips where I'm watching the race and I can switch between listening to, call it, radio audio as the drivers are yelling back to the pit, or switch to an in-car view as they're going through a series of corners. Like, that is a phenomenally awesome experience as a user, just to break it down into its most basic component. And again, you have to have a number of things working to your advantage. So is the network there and available? Is the platform there? How am I managing these simultaneous streams with my client? How intelligent are my endpoint devices? So my set-top box, and I won't name any names, right? What kind of horsepower do I need there to be able to support streaming and switching between these services and platforms in a very dynamic and effective way? And even today, we're seeing some of the best, I would say, experiences come from almost human to browser based UIs versus even some of the set-top boxes. And that's a really interesting scenario as well, which is trying to find the right balance. In the edge computing world, there's this conversation that's ongoing, which is, what really is the edge, right? How do you define the edge? How far do I need to be able to take my performance, my network, my connectivity, my compute, my cache store, my data, in order to be able to really deliver what the end users want? And so, depending on how you look at it, from all the way from centralized clouds to public clouds, where almost everything lives today for the most part, especially with these interactive services, all the way through, how do I get it into the front door and act as a service or a device sitting inside someone's house? So imagine you had a box in your home, something as small as your router, where you could have content loaded, you could have the experience ready to go, and I could switch between, let's say, the multicam view, for example, or other experiences like in-app communication and file transfer, and being able to have my Twitter feed on my TV simulcast with my video stream and have it all be in sync. And that's a phenomenal kind of end experience that everyone's going for, I think.
So okay, so we've talked about some of the problems, and there are many problems. We haven't even talked about some buffering and everything. Now, the typical arrangement for a CDN these days is that they seem to have like super pops or super blobs, if you like, of computing power. And they use those, they have those strategically placed in the country. They'll have 2 or 3 of those in a country. And then they basically stream from those locations. Edge computing is very different. So first of all, explain the difference, and then we can talk about how that can help with some of the problems that we discussed.
Yeah, that's a great one. So, there's a couple of models that have been really common in the CDN industry for a long time. Model number one is I'm going to set up capacity exactly to the model you brought up, Colin, which is I pick my locations. They're centralized. They're distributed within a country. They sit at these internet exchanges, as they're called. And from there, I can take my content and I can push it out or stream it to my end users. And I can build my capacity and management and everything around that. And I can say, oh, I've got 15 customers and this is how much data they move and et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, because of the dynamic nature of content, even again, what we saw with the pandemic validates how dynamic this industry can be. Yes, you can project growth over time. The reality is, that doesn't align with user habits. There's spikiness to that. There is unpredictability to that, especially as more and more people tune in online, and we've moved away or are heavily moving away from typical over-the-air broadcast to true internet-based television. And so when we dissect that from where we sit, especially, it's not just around CDN and planning for that anymore. And it brings up your point around edge compute being a little bit more having a different philosophy. Anywhere I can run a compute stack, I should be able to run a virtualized CDN as a service without a problem, right? So if I can do that, that really means I can deploy a rack to oversimplify it, and I can have some gear and IT gear out in the field, and I can run my CDN on top of it. And so the ability to flex into environments that are closer to the end user, going all the way from the public data center, hopping into the internet exchanges, going into the service provider footprint. So if we think about any one of the big telcos that are out there, those are the companies that are really, or I should really say, have the networks that are closest to the end users. And with 5G coming online, that's an area that we again see a lot of the network capacity for the edge sitting there. So the service provider footprint becomes a really big one for the shift in CDN. And this is where edge computing starts to make a difference. It's no longer about just trying to put a cache store, at the edge. It's around deploying compute that can be used flexibly. And that's what differentiates CDN edge compute above all else. It is the dynamic flexibility of having that platform there. And it does more than, just delivery. You can bring your dynamic ad insertion platform and run it on the edge next to where you're storing and hosting your content and media files, right? And create better AVOD type experiences, for example. Or you can run your analytics engine, your AI ML from that same standpoint. I mean, the dynamic ad insertion and that conceptually have similar foundational technology components. And so again, you can bring your computing layered components of analyzing, understanding, managing data in motion, and you can inherently tie it back into the simplicity, and it's fun to say simplicity because it's not simple, of just video delivery, effective video delivery. And when you put those two together, that's really where the edge compute component comes into play. So, it's no longer a blob of CDN that someone takes and carves off and says, oh, you can do some computing with my CDN. The reality is it has to be the opposite. It has to be compute-driven CDN, which is how we view delivery and CDN services at StackPath. And the future of it, from our view, based on the trends we're seeing and what our customers and users are doing, it's all around how do I better integrate my technology and services with my traditional video delivery. And the moment I can do that, that's when I can create really immersive, effective experiences for end users. So that's really where we think where we think video streaming is heading. And that's both in live as well as video on demand type services. Both of them require this new, call it archetype of platform delivery.
Yeah. So give us an idea where this pool of computing sits in the edge. I mean, if you look at like Netflix has their thing called Open Connect, and that's basically a cache that sits just inside an ISP's network? Are we talking about being like there in that location, or is it more even further out towards where consumers are than that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great question as well. I can tell you where it is today, and I can tell you where we think it's heading, which is we think it's heading at a minimum to where you see that cache store, right? So that ISP-based cache store, again, that only serves one function. The reality is you really want to be able to not just deliver effectively cached content, which there is inherently a lot of value for, but you also want to be able to manipulate it. You want to learn from it. You want to take your user insights and improve the experience for them. You know, what stream are they getting? What's happening? And you want to do that dynamically, including with ad insertion. So, you know, our view is that at a minimum, edge computing is going to live exactly where the most advanced customer forward, you know, video cache stores sit. And going a step beyond that, you know, in the future, you know, why not have a cache store local to the home, right? So let's talk vision. Longer term, there's no reason that a company like Netflix or another, you know, brilliant group of engineers at another video delivery firm aren't saying, how do I preload content so effectively that I'm understanding what my customers' viewing habits are, what they're most likely to click on, and I can get that content ready for them to watch, you know, from the moment they click the button in the highest possible resolution. So that is, you know, that's sort of the ultimate vision, right? That, you know, every company could have access to some sort of data store or cache store, even within your home. And with the network connectivity shifting from the central kind of, or call it central cloud that it's lived in, moving further to the edge, and where we can have bandwidth that's large enough or available enough to allow for, you know, call it, you know, home to home transmission, it creates a totally different network topology and architecture that, you know, the video community can leverage to also deliver on top of. So yeah, it's a, you know, future to be seen, but it's it could be a very interesting one.
Is this a really simple equation where if you put the computing solutions closer to where they're needed, that they just perform better for people that are using them? Is it that simple?
It is, and that's that the challenge is that it's much easier to say than to do, because how you package the compute, how, you know, video delivery companies, application companies, technology companies then leverage it also has a massive impact. But as far as deployment, absolutely, the closer you can get to end users, for example, you know, our vision at StackPath is to drive as close to end users as humanely possible. And then it comes down to how ingenious can the community be with leveraging this newfound power, right? It's a lot of power for one team to hold, but how do you leverage it? What do you do with Thor's hammer at that point?
You inadvertently said humanely possible, and I just had this image of the computing, all this computing power frying people or something. It was an interesting image.
Yeah, the goal is benevolent computing. We want to try to stay away from the alternatives.
Exactly. Okay, so so we've got this deepening base of computing power. It's moving out into much closer to where it's being needed. So how are things going to change as things go forward? So what sort of impact is this going to have on, particularly on the delivery of streaming video over time?
Absolutely. So, you know, I don't know how many people watched, you know, the AWS reInvent keynote. I don't know if that's like a popular hobby of people, but it is of mine, and I find them fascinating.
I got a feeling that a lot of people in this audience were not watching, including.
and so that, you know, the team at AWS essentially came out and said, and it's great, it's telling, which is, man, we had to work overtime, and a big thank you to all our employees for just working so hard to keep things up and running. And I think a lot of the world doesn't understand sometimes how frail the tech stack can be, like how much work it takes to actually deliver a bit, right? And how many people are looking at dashboards and how much automation and code has been written to do it. And it's really interesting when you start to look at it. And so how does the market keep up with that demand, right? How do companies like us and others ensure that at the end of the day, the technology should be completely invisible to the end user? They shouldn't care what it is. They should see an icon, a play button, and they click that, and their surround sound goes off and their screen lights up, and that should be the fun and excitement for the end user. So everything should be transparent. So keeping up with it is monumental. And even some of the behemoths like AWS have challenges in doing it. It takes a lot of effort and energy to do that. So we think it's going to come down to a couple of things. We think that availability, having a lot of regions, having our POPs, our deployments around the globe, close to end users, working with service providers and others to be, again, as close to people as possible is critical to that. So deployment, global footprint, and availability of services, all critical to keeping up with demand and getting ahead of it. The second part of that is, how do we streamline delivery? So when we look at things like, how does a company and platform deliver large files effectively? How does it do it in an error-free way? And when I say large files, I mean high bit rate. And high bit rate translates to, I want to be able to stream 4K content. You know, everyone's TVs this day and age, for the most part, are 4K, except for the few 1080p's that you have slaying around that you're not going to replace until you have to. But most of the TVs are 4K. And so you want to take advantage of that pixel density, that new experience. And as we see TVs coming out, you know, in the market that are already advertising and supporting 8K transmission, again, how does the backbone and the content itself deliver effectively when you're going to put that much strain on the network? And so the next part of that is the network. And you know, there's two modes of thinking. Either companies can spend a ton of money running backhaul networks, trying to go back to the source of content or where the data is stored for miles and miles and miles and spend bazillions of dollars doing it, or they can revise their strategy, which is think differently about networking and treat the entire network structure not as a centralized grid, but more of a mesh. And if you look at it from that lens, you know, the edge itself is suited more to a mesh network that has a lot more available capacity across a lot more distributed or more broadly distributed regions. So you know, those are just two factors that we think is ultimately, you know, going to drive this demand. The other part of it falls on the side of configurability and the services themselves, and that's managing things like, how do I manage my cache when I'm trying to, to deliver quality content quickly, right? And so if I reduce the buffer size, what does that happen? If I increase the buffer size, what happens there? And how do I balance the user experience on that side through my services and platform to be able to take advantage of, you know, the fact that the platforms are all shifting closer to the edge? And how do I reconfigure my CDN? How do I reconfigure my cache? How do I, change the way that I think about delivering and my customer experience or my user experience in that standpoint to be able to solve it? So the market has a lot to do to keep up with this demand that is continually growing, to put it nicely.
Yeah, it sure does. You touched on an interesting point. I spoke to a lot of CDNs last year, and they really did work hard to make it really seamless to us that everything just worked. And I was very impressed with the fact that they were able to pull forward stuff equipment installations that they hadn't planned for a year or two in the future. They were able to pull that forward into this year. So with this edge compute, I hear some of the advantages. Are there any disadvantages to it? I mean, is it less eco-friendly because isn't it more efficient to keep everything in one place and heat one facility? Or are there other disadvantages we should know about before we all move to edge compute?
Yeah, that's a great one. Of course, there are advantages to keeping things centralized. Those advantages typically come down to cost. Cost also comes with other components, which is, you're also going to see a difference in performance as well, right? Because you're centralizing. Yes, you're going to control cooling and power usage, and you're going to change the design of the data center. The reality is there are very efficient ways in cooling and managing small data centers, and we've seen this for quite a long time, from everything from evaporative cooling to burying the data center underground. There are very creative and clever ways that allow us to distribute that footprint and still not impact the environment in negative ways. And so sustainable edge deployments are going to be very effective. They're also easier to power. You don't have to have as much centralized, just call it pure wattage going into an environment, because it's going to be a smaller, much more manageable data center. So that also has an impact on complexity of cooling, deployability, service life. There are a number of different kind of variables that have inherently see come out of this as well. So is it eco-friendly? Yes, edge computing is certainly going to be eco-friendly, I believe. The disadvantages, diving back into the depth of your question there, Colin, there aren't a lot of disadvantages to edge computing. It really has been the natural order of compute and services for quite a while. If we look into the market, there's been periods of expansion and contraction. You started with mainframes, you went to server client work groups, you go back to centralized computing with support with thin clients. Like all of these concepts of going to centralized, then distributed, then centralized, distributed, these models have continued over time, and they mirror the ability for us as a human race to build technology that can evolve and improve on what we had before. The mainstay, we think, is we've evolved over the past 20 years into a centralized model, and it is, again, just about time. We think over the past few years we've seen it, and certainly over the next 10 to 20 we're going to continue to see it, is the evolution to distributed computing because of the control it gives the application development community, the control it gives people who are innovating in the field of video delivery and content and advertising and analytics. And these are big. And you look at technologies like blockchain, the entire concept of blockchain is meant to be distributed ledger and distributed compute technology and capability. And so, our viewpoint is there aren't any disadvantages to it. It is all around actually giving people more control, more flexibility, better performance, lower latency, and ultimately enabling what is hopefully going to be a completely new generation of innovation and technologies and applications to come from it.
So it sounds like I get lots of benefits. I get a more reliable delivery. Do I get more resilience? I mean, if there's a problem, is this more reliable now?
It is, and the beauty is that you don't lose the performance that you get. You just, worst case scenario, if a location goes down, let's say, in the world of AWS, if one whole region shuts down, which it hasn't yet, but there certainly have been hiccups in the past, there always are with infrastructure. If you look at those types of scenarios, you lose a giant chunk of capability. In the world of edge computing, you just really start to do this concept of looking left to your neighbor, right? And being able to just skip over, a block, an intersection on the internet and grab your content or interact with an application. And so, yes, there's greater resiliency in distributed design just inherently. And as is there greater control, because you can also control the user experience, both through the fact that it's distributed, you can refine your application to run in different areas, but still have them be close proximity to one another. So if it does switch over, you don't lose anything as far as user experience goes. And that's a big benefit of the whole thing, is absolutely resiliency is built into the matrix design of edge computing.
So I'm just a little guy. I just got a small service. Oh, this sounds expensive. It sounds like I can't afford an edge platform to deliver my stuff.
That's a great question. It's funny. So edge computing, really, you're not paying much more than you would for any centralized computing workload. You pay a small premium because of the location and footprint, but it's pennies compared to the amount of scale you would have to run in a centralized location to be able to deliver at the same level of quality or resiliency. So the trade-off is, or the question that people have to ask is, what's the right business model for me? Am I going for the lowest cost delivery, which means I'm going to put my business and my customer, satisfaction at risk? Or am I going to try to use a platform that ultimately can scale with me, can deliver at a high quality, and I can intelligently manage my application design? So I can have things that I, don't need resiliency with in core cloud, and I can just run it at the lowest possible cost. And then can I bring all of the critical elements of my application stack to the edge? And use the edge as the landing point, or launching pad, really is a better word for it, the launching pad for quality and complex delivery. And so the cost becomes secondary, because once you've broken your application and your stack up effectively as an organization who's thinking about these types of things, the cost factor goes away, and you're thinking about where's the performant part of my application run, and where does my legacy, my massive data sets that I want to store and keep cheaply and do stuff with later, where does that sit? And that's the dichotomy between call it centralized computing and edge computing, which is edge computing's performance. The premium you're paying is nothing compared to the service level and quality that your customers get.
Is there a possibility that I could actually save money in other ways? Like, for example, if I do my encoding at the edge and I do it, it's really transcoding function. So I don't actually, right now we have to store all of these video files in all of these different formats and yada, yada, yada. Is there a chance that I could save money by only having to store one and then using the edge to do a transcode at the time that I need it?
100%, and that's a great one. So I kind of alluded to that concept of having data, or having part of your application in one place and the other part at the edge, and it feeds exactly into that model, which is I can trade large data stores for dynamicism, or call it variability. And what the edge gives me is the ability to be variable, to be dynamic to, or respond to whatever my customers need or whatever changes have to happen. And that's actually an excellent one. So when you think about transcoding, yes, I can create and store 45 file types and sizes and formats and encode in different bit rates all the way through and different audio quality. And then I can store them someplace and deliver when people ask me to, or I can leverage exactly that, which is the edge. I can store one file. And it's, again, the edge is really all around, call it data in motion. It's all around how do I take something and replicate it, move the data around, make decisions based off of it, deliver it effectively, versus core computing is really all around data at rest. And this is the piece that's changing the way people need to look at compute, which is edge computing versus core computing. So you're going to have part of your application architecture sitting in one place and the other sitting at the edge. And our view, my view, is obviously performant applications are going to reside at the edge in that process.
Yeah, I feel like when I think about the future of streaming in particular, and it's scaling to Super Bowl sized audiences, I feel like we must have some sort of edge capability to get there, right? It seems like, storing in big data centers and streaming from big streaming centers can only get us so far. I'm guessing you'd probably agree with that, but explain a little bit about how it helps us scale to Super Bowl sized audiences who want to stream in 4K. Let's be honest, they're going to want to do that, right?
Absolutely. So, I can tell you that even today, we have, companies, users on our platform that are leveraging our service, our edge distributed platform, for doing exactly that, which is delivering content across the globe, live events with really what is ultra low fixed latency. So how do you control the delivery of something like the Super Bowl effectively at that type of scale? So what they've done with us, to be very fair, and it's not even, hey, the future is coming. It's that you could do this today if you wanted to. So think about the use case. It's ultra low fixed latency. There's really no buffering, any drifting. You're configuring the stream to sync with any linear broadcast, or potentially even be faster than broadcast because you're going live all across edge to edge. You can manage the quality of your delivery, right? So you have better quality of service controls and the quality of experience that you can deliver because it's based on internet transmission as opposed to general broadcast. You can manage the quality of video and audio sync. You can pull in voting and betting attributes, and not that I condone betting, I'm just talking about it from a use case standpoint, to each their own. But you can bring in that type of activity, polls, quizzes, data overlays, human interaction and engagement, such as a Twitter feed or content feed, and text messaging or chatting with friends. And we've seen these experiences become more and more relevant. Latency doesn't matter to some of them as much yet. So when we think about game streaming or esports, but when you start looking at any live event where there might be a financial aspect to it, especially in the betting world, it's massive. And again, we've got people doing this on top of the StackPath platform today. And ultimately, it's scalable just because of the fact that the edge is completely distributed. It is global, and we've got footprint all over the place. And that's it's meant to do exactly that. It's to give people the horsepower to build the logic on top to connect people and content in any event.
And gambling is a really special, rigorous case, right? It means if you're really delivering for a gambling organization, you literally cannot have people seeing different things at different times, because that just
Colin, that's how riots start. So yes,
that's how riots start. That causes unrest indeed. And I suppose with such low latency, you mentioned there was something you said there about synchronicity. Do I automatically start to be able to do multi-stream synced experiences? So, you know, you can pick your view in the stadium, you can pick your driver in the F1 car, whether you want Bottas or somebody else, Lewis Hamilton. Is that the sort of thing that just sort of falls out because of this very, very low latency?
That's right. It makes it possible. So, you know, you can build any experience, and we can even look at gaming as a great version of this, right? So, you know, if we look at Microsoft xCloud or we look at Google Stadia, these are applications and services where latency is absolutely critical. You're essentially removing the console from the home. You're putting the compute horsepower as close as you can in an edge data center, edge deployment somewhere, in order to try to give people the ability to experience a service across multiple screens, across different platforms. And multi-screen synced delivery is the same concept. You have to be able to have the distributed footprint and capacity to be able to, you know, manage these things from a time sync standpoint, as well as quality of delivery. So the use case is, it's possible, but it's not possible without massive investment. And companies like us who are trying to build this edge platform and putting this out there and helping our clients with exactly this type of problem, you know, our viewpoint is that, you know, when we've got it built, when we've invested in everything from the network to services to platform to footprint, you know, we're creating the opportunity again for companies to innovate and build better experiences on top of our technology.
Very good, very good. Well, I've been asking questions for long enough. I think it's time for us to work in some of the audience questions here. So, Laura, can we put up our poll? So while Arash and I talk about the poll question, the user questions, you can take a look at that poll, and let's just see if. Okay, Laura, thank you for slipping in that little bonus question where have some fun with this about asking you about whether you who you wanted to win the Oscar last night for Best Picture. But there were a couple of questions that I definitely wanted to fit in. One from Burke City. He says, does Arash foresee the possibility of brands, advertisers sponsoring synced improved streaming like for live events, for example, NBA playoffs, brought to you by, he gives Abercrombie, because your views, fashion, look should always be in sync. So the brand advertiser, there's a man who's definitely got advertising on the mind. So the brand advertiser pays for the bandwidth needed for the bigger live events. That's an interesting opportunity, right?
It is. That's so, you know, that's so creative. And I can tell you, I have literally never thought about that before, but such a fascinating perspective. And that's why I love sessions like this. Yeah, of course it's possible. So, you know, along with the fact that you can improve experiences, I think when we think about human beings, there is always the opportunity to charge more for, and at the same time trade value for, because the customer wants to pay for it, is how do I get a better quality experience, and am I willing to pay for it? And a sponsored, you know, higher quality stream, yeah, you know, if you had told me that I could watch a stream that would show me, you know, Ferrari ads during it, but I would get to see the Super Bowl in 4K with a better, you know, quality of audio, and I could, you know, do multi-cam views and switch and listen to the sidelines. Oh, I'd be happy to pay for that if it was me as a consumer. And as an advertiser, what an amazing opportunity to put your name next to a much better end user experience. Like that's pretty darn cool and very creative thinking.
It is very creative, very creative. So another question came in about group viewing, and I mean, does that work better in an edge computing environment than in a more centralized fashion?
Yes, it certainly can, and there's two key benefits to that, right? Is that if your doing what I would call, multifamily viewing, or you're doing a synced event, right, across multiple homes with friends, you get the benefit of now you actually have to manage it just like a live event. And so it's no longer necessarily trying to do, there's maybe two schools of thought. I'm just going to try to sync the video start and play times across. But the best way is to really treat it like a live event, give one person control and command over it, or be able to move that around. So there's a lot of really interesting experiences that you can build off of it. So without question, at the edge, when you're running something like this and it's talking and we're looking at how do I sync an event that's meant to be live across multiple households or families or users, then yes, the edge is again built to deliver a better quality experience with the software stack and services running on top of it than if you were to try to do it from a centralized region. So you can play tricks, trying to do it centralized, but it's much harder than having the power at your fingertips through the network and the compute platform.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. All right, well, we're just about out of time. So let's take a look at the poll answers, Laura, and see what people had to say. So I asked, in the last 3 months, have you experienced problems streaming video to your television? And it looks like, wow, 85% have, 53% multiple times. So, boy, we have a ways to go. I'm actually kind of surprised. I'm trying to remember the last time I've had I know I've had problems in the last several months. How about you? Have you personally had problems?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Through the course of the pandemic, we had the kids in the house doing schoolwork and being on Zoom and conferences, and then myself living on Zoom and in conferences as well, obviously. And our internet took a hit. So the first thing I did was I upgraded the bandwidth of the house. And then even with that, we run into service streaming quality. So I've had bitrate drops. It happens a lot more frequently than I'd like, particularly during peak viewing times. And then same thing with content availability or cutout. Fortunately, I haven't had any events where I've had this content get killed in the middle of a movie or a stream, but I certainly have had blips and rebuffering occur before.
A question just came in quite late from Barbara Bell. I wonder if you can comment on it real quick. It's a very interesting one. She says, how does 5G affect edge computing? Are they related?
It's such a good question. So they are related, even though the technologies don't seem to be, connected. The reality is what 5G is doing is it's bringing a ton of bandwidth to the area between the cell tower and the home. And there's this viewpoint that says 5G has enough capability with its millimeter wave technology to be able to get to a point where maybe you don't even have an access point or broadband connection coming to the house anymore. Any connected device could just go straight over 5G to the cell tower and have gigabit plus connectivity without a problem. And so when you look at that concept, the question is then very simply, okay, if I then put edge computing at the base of that tower, which is the first spot any device connects to, man, there are some amazing things I could do. I mean, imagine the ability to instantly interact with any media, content, all the stuff that's hard to get and hard to manage the quality of service of. But if you're just literally one hop away from being able to get to it, and you're not going over the internet with 75 hops to get to some data center, centrally located, that's an incredible outcome. So yeah, 5G and edge computing are very interrelated. The network architecture, yeah, that's right. The network architecture change that we'll see with it, is driving the ability to do 5G. The ability to do edge computing more effectively and in more unique ways. And so that's why companies like us are pushing further and further into the service provider footprints and working with service providers and broadening our solutions so that we're sitting there right where customers want to be, and thus where the applications and content want to live.
Yeah. All right, let's look at the other question just real quick. Have you streamed video in 4K Ultra HD this year? Almost half have, and 16% are actually doing it daily. So better than a quarter are doing it for specials and for daily. Which of these features would you like most? Well, it looks like multi-camera angle sports and error-free playback are the most preferred by everybody. And well, it looks like the Oscars got it right, because Nomadland came out ahead there. I know I would have voted for Nomadland. I thought it was really super, a great movie. What about you? Which would you have voted for?
Oh, that's a great one. I haven't seen Nomadland yet. It's on my list. I would say
yeah.
Judas and the Black Messiah was pretty phenomenal, as was The Trial of Chicago 7. So
yeah,
any one of those three, pending my viewing of Nomadland, would be in my top 3.
Yeah, well, yeah, you'll have to let us know what you think after you watch Nomadland. Arash, this has been great fun. Thank you so much. I could have asked you a lot more questions. Perhaps we'll get a chance to do this again sometime soon.
Sounds wonderful, Colin. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the audience participation. You guys had both some really creative insights and great questions. So I enjoyed it as well. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. So Ned, back to you.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic discussion. And yeah, Arash, I agree. Like the audience, thank you for participating, folks, and asking such insightful questions. And Arash, thank you to StackPath for supporting the show today. We'd love to have you guys back in the future.